Okay. Well, this is a rock. It's actually a special rock. It's actually a shale rock. And it's the reason we're here today and concerned about gas monetization, because the bountiful supply of not only gas and also oil from this rock. This is a core sample taken about 7,000 feet below one of the shale plays. It's black. It's indicative of hydrocarbons in here. There's about anywhere in general in shale 2 to 10% hydrocarbons, oil and gas, in this rock in very fine pores that were considered source rocks, but not the way not E&P plays to get the oil out, because it was just bound and too strongly, too hard to get out. What came along, the technological breakthrough, though, that came along is horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. Combining those was the breakthrough, and this was a tremendous technological advancement. And the story of this advancement and the entrepreneurship, and George P. Mitchell is in this book, The Frackers. And I'll recommend that you read this. Now, fracking gave us, and shale gave us this bounty supply of gas, but also gave us an excess supply of oil. And then the excess supply resulted in lower prices. So now it's a challenge to monetize the gas to other products, because the product prices of, let's say, LNG, liquids, products, even ammonia, methanol, are now lower as a result related to the lower oil prices. So we find ourselves in a more challenging environment to monetize this bountiful supply of gas. In my talk now, my pleasure to give you a little bit of context. It's called a tutorial. I'm going to give a little bit of detail to help you appreciate the rest of the talks and somewhat of Uday's talks, as well as in one area, gas to liquid, sort of my sort of core specialty. I'm going to go a little more deeper into detail about this. The key messages we want to give you is that natural gas can be monetized as a fuel or as a chemical. And there's a variety of mature and emerging technologies, and therein lies a dilemma. How do you choose among these choices? And we're going to go into some of the ways, techniques to do that, or the issues. Also, power generation is actually the biggest market in the United States. And by the way, we're focusing now on North America, and particularly the United States, where the bountiful supply of shale gas exists, and the ability to get it out economically and market it. Power generation is the biggest market. It's growing, has grown rapidly, and it's dominated by large plants. But as we'll go into later, there is an emerging area of distributed power generation that's slowly gaining traction. Uday talked about LNG exports. This is going to be it's starting now. It started last year, and it's going to grow to a significant portion of the gas supply. These are mostly large-scale plants. These are large-scale plants now, but the small and mid-scale, our LNG, is growing, is another demand source. The fourth message is going to talk about natural gas to chemicals. And here we're talking, and fuels and other liquids that can be monetized. And here we're talking about chemical conversion of natural gas to ammonia and methanol, particularly. And this is a great story, because 15 years ago, before the shale revolution, gas was expensive in the United States. We're going to the 2000s. And these plants left the United States because they couldn't compete economically. Now, with ample supplies of low-cost gas, these plants are coming back, and this is creating another significant demand for the gas, as well as opportunities for gas to liquids, converting natural gas to diesel and gasoline that I'll talk about in some depth. And finally, I'll talk about, well, how do you decide among these? How do you do feasibility studies? So prospect is it. And I'll go into a little bit of the factors and how to evaluate these options and go into show some analyses there. Okay, it was briefly shown before by Uday. These are the major sources: electricity, LNG, chemicals, liquid fuels, and transportation. And you can see today the U.S. demand breakdown, and again, this is end consumables and consumption. Electricity is the biggest source, and then the vehicles is small, but still in the news a lot. And in industrial, we have is where the chemicals are, methanol and ammonia is in here. Now, sometimes when I go out and I give these talks, my background is in the oil industry, Mobil, Amoco, BP. I'm used to big numbers, but I recognize that many in the audience are not used to these big numbers, and so what do they mean? What does 27 billion cubic feet of gas mean? And the only way I can relate that is to dollars. I mean, the value of this gas, this 27 billion BTUs, let's say $3 a million BTUs, is about $80 million a day. That's $80 million a day. It's a big number. Even that's very big. It's hard to relate to. But for just comparison, even a bigger number is the oil. The value of the U.S. production of oil of 9 million barrels a day, let's say 50, is almost $500 million. That's a huge number. So we're talking about big numbers in the industry, but still these monetization of gas, the value of even smaller volumes like methanol and ammonia, is still, it's a very nice bit of money, a very good business. So today I wanted to set the stage for other speakers who are going to go into more details of this. Elliott Smith will talk later on, right after me, on natural gas and power. Then Tyler on LNG and natural pipelines. Brandon Johnson will talk on NGL supply, and I won't be going into NGL supply in my talk. Then we'll have some panel discussions that will talk about gas conversion as well as small and mid-scale LNG. Okay, natural gas is, for power generation, is growing, in part because the price went down considerably because of the ample supply from the 2000s. And also it's a clean fuel, and it's sort of the capital cost for the plants is relatively less than a coal-fired plant. So it's here you see how it's grown significantly since 2000. A sort of a growing area, it's starting to get traction, is distributed power. And here we're showing sort of a definition of distributed is maybe on a megawatt size of 100 megawatts to 50 is one definition. It's used more at the point of source, at the source of the demand, rather than on long transmission lines. And here we show it's growing over the years, projected from up to 26,000 megawatts. And again, what is that? That's a huge number. What does it mean? Today, we're using, or the capacity is about a million megawatts. So this is about the 2020 figure is about 2.5% relative to today. So we're starting to get into significant numbers. And Elliott will talk more about a little bit about distributed power. Now let's talk about LNG. And this is really a remarkable story. I'll give you personal experience. About 2003, 4, 5 time period, if you recall, there was a lot of plans to bring LNG import into the United States. And actually, while I was with BP, I was on a project to bring in LNG to a port in New Jersey. And this was one of like several dozen proposals. So how fast things have changed. Now, fast forward, we've turned, to the extent that some of these were regasification facilities, they've been turned into liquefaction facilities, and new facilities have been built. So today, there's about a 500 million cubic feet of gas actually exported. It started, and it's projected to grow quite significantly, as Uday has shown. This is a remarkable story. So far, all of these plants in the United States are large scale, but now there's a market and a need, and Tyler will go into this more about the small scale and mid scale attractions. Okay, so what is LNG, or what does the process look like? First, I'll go back to the question of definition. And as Uday said, on metric tons per annum. And it's funny, it's in the industry, there's BCF, there's BTUs, there's metric tons. So there's a lot of different terms. So what to relate it to, 1 metric ton per annum is about 140 million BTUs, 140 million standard cubic feet a day. So a plant that would make 1 million tons an annum of methanol, let's say, or LNG rather, would need 140 million BTU, standard cubic feet of gas. A plant that you use 5 is about 750 million cubic feet. And 40 up here, this is very big, this is a little less than 7 billion cubic feet of gas. So these are, these are huge numbers. If you remember, the total U.S. end-use demand is 71 billion cubic feet. So these are very substantial numbers up here in these large scale. And obviously, you can see that's the reason they're exported into the much larger market. Looking at technology providers, Air Products for many years is, and still is, the major supplier of technology. But ConocoPhillips is, it's an interesting story. They, the first plant, LNG plant in the world was in Alaska. And that was built in 1969. And that was ConocoPhillips technology. Fast forward in the early 2000s, actually when BP was building a LNG plant in Trinidad, first plant there, they picked ConocoPhillips. And since then, the ConocoPhillips LNG business has grown. Okay, now the technology to do it. First of all, when you take raw natural gas here, and this is, some plants like the Cheniere plant in Sabine Pass takes pipeline gas. But many other plants, particularly around the world, take raw gas from the wells. So this is showing more generically, if you get raw gas, you need a gas plant to take out condensates. You need acid gas removal, that's CO2 and H2S. Basically, to go from natural gas to LNG, LNG is a very pure form, minus 162 degrees centigrade, liquid. So you have to take out all the impurities, all the water, all the CO2, just about all the H2S in the raw gas, and there's a lot of processing that goes with it. Along the way, there's some hydrocarbons in there, like ethane, propane, and as you're cooling down the gas, these condense out and you take them out. So this is showing an LPG stream, and plus a recycle of the condensate to the gas plant. So there's a fair amount of processing that has to be done here. Now, as Uday mentioned, there's small scale and large scale, mid-scale plants all across the spectrum. So here we're showing the stage of technology development and the commercialization progress, where in the upper right, the sort of sweet spot is the Air Products technology and the ConocoPhillips technology. Also there, in there, pretty far along is Chart, and for small scale, modular liquefaction, and Shell is there. But there are a lot of other players, particularly as you get to the small scale. There's notable, Praxair has a plant, a pilot plant, and General Electric is in LNG in the smaller scale. And so there's a lot of players across the spectrum merging and technologies as well as commercializing them. It's quite an active field. Okay, now let's turn to natural gas conversion and products. This today is a significant market for chemicals, for conversion from natural gas. And there's a lot of development work for converting the natural gas technology to convert it to diesel and gasoline. And you'll be hearing about some of them at the panel discussion. First, what do we mean by this conversion? What is conversion? There's a number of routes, and there's different terminology. The main route, when people talk about gas to liquids, it's through syngas, which is carbon monoxide and hydrogen, then through Fischer-Tropsch to form, with additional processing, diesel, petrochemical naphtha, and jet fuel, as well as could be lubricants. So the main, we talk about GTL, mainly talking about this route. Now, when we say MTG, we're going through the methanol route. In fact, MTG is methanol to gasoline. And actually, I know this route, I'm very familiar with it. I spent part of my life on this route. I was in the 80s on Mobil's team that developed the MTG technology up in the New Jersey laboratory that was commercialized in New Zealand. And I'll show you a picture of a map of the other, with where that was. Methanol by itself is not in the United States, but well, first of all, it's a chemical, and there's a number of plants that are being built to use have been built, are running, and are planned to use natural gas to make methanol in the United States. And also, there's effort underway to develop new markets, and one of the new markets is a transportation fuel is DME, dimethyl ether. And Lee is in the audience. We just published here, I published an article, and Lee's the publisher of the editor of Hydrocarbon Processing, this February Clean Fuels issue. There's an article on DME as a diesel alternative in North America. And so if you want more information on it, please go to this article. And then there's the other route through, here we have hydrogen, that's through ammonia. Ammonia is a very, like methanol, is a commodity chemical. Plants are now being built in the United States, running to take advantage of low-cost gas after shutting down in the early 2000s because of the high cost of gas. Now these plants are coming back, and this is a significant end use for natural gas, as well as refineries that need the hydrogen to improve the product distribution, to crack the larger molecules to smaller using hydrocracking, and as well as to reduce the impurities, the sulfur content to the new, more stringent regulations. So hydrogen is a very important chemical to use in our industry. Okay, where are the plants now? You see here, this is the plant that I worked on for commercialization. It ran for about 12 years, and then the price of methanol came up high, and the price of gasoline was lower, so it wasn't economical to convert it, so now it's producing methanol for Methanex. The other plants in the world show the main plant was, the main sort of capital of GTL is in Qatar. And here the two big plants are the Sasol plant and the Shell plant. Shell is a mega plant. This takes almost over a billion cubic feet of gas. The news is, you may not be aware of it, but in Turkmenistan, how the Topso's technology is being used to create to build, and it's under construction now, start up probably in 2019. Making about 15,000 barrels a day of gasoline using Haldor Topsoe technology. Fast forward to the United States, and you'll hear about there'll be a talk in the panel discussion, one of the panelists, but there's also a Velocis plant that started up in Oklahoma just recently, it's a Fischer-Tropsch technology routes. The Velocis is interesting because it uses co-feeds biogas from a landfill. So they're benefiting from renewable credits. Okay, what is gas to liquids technology? It's somewhat more complicated than LNG. We're doing very much, it's doing chemical conversion. But though as complicated it is, our industry is familiar with this technology. And so we know how to deal with it. And the technology involves, and there's various technology providers here for syngas production, carbon monoxide and hydrogen again, Fischer-Tropsch conversion to a wax, or sometimes a wax, sometimes people are going to tell you it can be a synthetic crude or a clean crude that can be easily distilled into products, depending on the Fischer-Tropsch technology, as well as an upgrading step to create a high-quality diesel, petrochemical naphtha, and some other products. Now here is showing the technology providers, and there's a number of them. While I was at BP, we were developing this BP's Fischer-Tropsch technology with Davy Process, and now Davy Process is part of Johnson Matthey. So there are a number of technology providers here. One aspect of GTL that we like to point out is the cost distribution. The most expensive step is the syngas formation. The next is the Fischer-Tropsch, and then there's the other units. And our message here, the message here is that even if Fischer-Tropsch and upgrading were free, there's still expense here. And of course, it's not free, but even if the product upgrading is free, it's still, there's a cost associated with it. And most of the work, development work, is in the Fischer-Tropsch area to reduce costs. The big goal also is in the synthesis gas, and there's been less, but there has been work. There have been companies working on lower the cost, more improvements. Johnson Matthey is one of them. And there's other technology, new technology providers that have looked at this area. So it's not, it is being looked at to lower the cost, but it's not as prominent as the effort on Fischer-Tropsch. As I mentioned, all the routes to monetize gas, LNG, the chemical conversion are somewhat challenged because of low oil prices, which have resulted in low product prices, whether it be for methanol or ammonia, or of course for gasoline. So effort has been, so the question is how can you improve the economics? And here I'm showing some learnings from a previous ADI study, which shows sort of, though it was done with a little bit higher oil environment, it's still illustrative of what you can do to get more value out of a project, a gas to liquids project. And namely, it's polygeneration here is making higher value products such as lubricants. Shell in Qatar is making very high quality lubricants that they're shipping around the world. Efficiencies, looking at better ways, lower cost ways to make the capital, the equipment, lower prices for the feedstock, for the natural gas, of course, and then efficiencies in the operating expenses. So all these areas have to be looked at to get the value up to where it's more bankable and profitable. Okay, here's the methanol and the ammonia story. The amount of additions of methanol in million tons, the 4.8, it represents the world global demand for methanol is about 60 to 70 million metric tons an annum. Up until this bountiful supply of natural gas from shale, we've been importing our methanol. And now we're building up capacity methanol in the United States, and pretty soon we could be actually exporting. A lot of this now is for domestic, backing out imports from such countries as Trinidad. So Trinidad has to find a new market. Ammonia, similar story, has come back. There are plants. However, a few years ago, when oil prices were high, methanol prices were high, ammonia prices were high, a lot of these plants were planned and started construction. And now with the downturn in the product prices, some of the plants, a lot of the plants, let's say here, were shown for ammonia, and some for methanol that were in the pipeline have been delayed. And this shows the other bar graph shows the amount of gas that is utilized, 0.1 BCF for ammonia, 0.4 for methanol BCF. It's a fraction, but you know, as I'll go back to many years ago, Senator Everett Dirksen talked about money. He started to see, instead of $1 million on budgets, he started seeing billions. And he said, a quote, like a billion here, a billion there. Pretty soon we're talking about a lot of money. So a billion, even a 0.4 billion cubic feet of gas is a lot of gas. It's an important supply. Okay, let's look at when you're evaluating these technologies and working on a commercial project, you have to look at it in various ways besides the commercial terms. And when you're looking at options, you have to, one way that we in the industry do this, is to do feasibility studies. And this gives input as the funnel of information decision-making goes down the pathway to decide. So here is showing an analysis, an ADI analysis for methanol from small plants as a function of the natural gas cost here and as a function of the CapEx. And we're showing the break-even cost for a small-scale plant. And break-even cost is given all the costs and giving a 10% return on investment, what is the break-even price of methanol that we need. And although 10% may not be enough for bankable interest, it's a benchmark. It's a point of analysis. And also, this type of study gives you another perspective on the comparisons and of the issues for discussion. So here we're showing, for instance, at $4 a million BTU, this area, if we have a CapEx of $900 per ton, then the price for break-even is a little under $300 a metric ton of methanol. Today, in the past, we've had the average price, you can see, has been over $400, but this was when oil prices were sort of a higher oil price environment. Today, methanol is about $225 a metric ton, but the price is coming up, and the expectation is oil prices increase a little bit, the price of methanol will come up, and also it depends on what your price of natural gas is. If you're in the Marcellus field, closer to the source, you can get a lower price for it. So this analysis is generic. It's a point for discussion. Any specific project or concept needs to be evaluated for that site and also by that company. Now, turning to more small scale and where there's a lot of active interest in developments. A lot of this interest started years ago when prices of oil were high. Even though gas prices were high, sometimes it was low. And there's always, gas to liquids is a very attractive technology. I mean, it's really, when you take natural gas, which is a gas, and you're converting it to diesel fuel or gasoline fuel that you can run in your car, I mean, that's remarkable. When I was at Paulsboro Mobil's development plant, the development worked because it was commercial to make methanol from natural gas. To make gasoline from methanol was the last link. So when Mobil was developing the methanol to gasoline process, it was really with the idea of starting with natural gas, or in those days, actually coal, converting it to synthesis gas and then to methanol was known technology. So the last link was methanol to gasoline. So that's what we developed in New Jersey at the laboratory. So I actually was responsible for a 4-barrel-a-day demo unit that converted methanol that actually I got from a Borden plant in Louisiana, to gasoline and water. And we actually were able to take the gasoline right off the unit, even before additives are in it, put it in an automobile, and the automobile would run very well. It was warmed up, so it was special little conditions, but we wanted to demonstrate to the bankers that the gasoline that was made right off the unit was really close to suitable for as a gasoline, conventional gasoline fuel. And so it's quite remarkable chemistry. Now the challenge, years ago, the saying was economies of scale, so we built bigger and bigger plants, LNG, gas to liquids plant, but the world became more capital constrained, had to have more capital discipline. There was less money available. So smaller became more the thing, and you saw it was more distributed. We talked about, we see more on LNG, smaller plants are now more desirable. With methanol, at one time we talked about much bigger plants than today. So likewise on gas to liquids, we're backing away from the mega plants, the BCF plants, 100,000 barrels a day that Shell and Sasso were planning for Louisiana. We're backing away to smaller, less expensive plants, maybe plants that you can build up in size by different modules, more multiple modules, as the market was there, as the financing was there. And so small scale has become more desirable, and there's a lot of effort in this area. And by small scale, in terms of the mega plants, the large scale is 15,000 barrels a day and up. In small scale, it varies, but a point of reference, we're talking about 1,000 to 10,000 barrels a day, whereas for some of the oil fields, to take flared gas, for instance, 1,000 barrels a day has been talked about as the sweet spot. And here we're showing some of the technology developers. The Velocis has a plant going. Infra, you'll hear about the panel discussion. Primus, which is through methanol. Maverick, Oberon is making the DME from methanol out in California, and Gas Techno. And what's interesting is these two are Fischer-Tropsch. This is, the rest are primarily gas through methanol, and actually some of them are now stopping at methanol in their projects because it just takes less capital to go to methanol than it does to go to gasoline. So, but there's a number of technology developers, and they're moving along to, they're getting along from small scale, working their way to commercialization. So very nice to see things continuing and the progress.
Ron, pardon me,
oh no, that's okay.
A slow morning for me. Green signifies fully commercial. Or white?
No, thank you.
Column.
Yeah, all black would be fully commercial. White is not commercial yet. It's more of at the pilot stage. So yeah, more. There we go. So the darker it is, the better it is with further progress. Lighter, but thank you. Okay, now let's see, move on to the feasibility. More, how do we evaluate all these factors, the feasibility of these projects? There's based on commodity price differentials, technology risks, the market, what they're willing to adopt, and competition. So how do we put this all together? And there's a number of factors here that we're highlighting, starting with the numbers, the 1 through 6. Oil and gas price differential, and I'll go more into that shortly. Developers' position in the value chain. These projects, how we look at them, sort of the same beauty is in the eye of the beholder. How you look at a project is in the eye of the company, what their position is. They have the technology position, their financing position, what markets they're already in to market the products. It's very, very company specific. The capital cost there is involved, the amount. You have to have financial discipline more these days. You probably always had to have it, but it's more critical these days. feedstock sourcing, the offtake for the products, what products you're making, what are the issues there is very important consideration. The technology maturity to reduce the technology risk. It's a difference if you're a Shell and have the big plants going, or if you haven't gotten commercialized, you're proposing the first commercialization of it. Financing, of course. So there's a number of issues. You have to look at it, these projects holistically. Okay, the spread. Going back to the early 90s, there wasn't, in the United States, which we're showing here, there wasn't a spread. So when you heard about projects, gas to liquids projects, they were in gutter. They were abroad, maybe Australia. They were not in the United States. Then with the shale revolution, the price spread between gas and oil widened. Gas supplies became available, and then projects started to be thought of and proposed in the United States. And the 2008-9, the financial crisis came along and sort of lowered oil prices and put a crimp on, but oil prices rebounded pretty nicely for a while, and life was good for the nice spread. Then lo and behold, as we know, 2000 and at the end of 2015, prices started to drop, and the spread narrowed, and it's even more showing than today. It's narrowed even further, but then it's now increasing. So the spread, and although we're talking about conversion in methanol prices tend to correlate with oil prices, and ammonia prices tend to also, because I think the GNP of countries, as GNP increases, prices tend to get high for methanol and ammonia. With oil prices lower, GNP growth seems to diminish, going along with it. Demands drop, and prices of value of the methanol and ammonia has diminished. And so that those projects, as I mentioned, are stressed. Another analysis is another way is showing, this is another ADI analysis, and showing the economics for GTL, MTG, and LNG versus the CapEx is showing the and on the x-axis the volume of natural gas used. And the point here is not so much the exact bases that we used. The point here is that on this analysis, LNG looked very good, looks very good, particularly for large volumes. This is 1 BCF here. You notice one of the attractions is due to the lower capital here. And this is real in part because there's a sort of an oddity in the value chains here. For MTG and GTL, all the investment is in the natural gas to gasoline part. For LNG, though, going from the point source of the gas liquefaction, there's actually shipping and regas getting to the market. And the regas CapEx and the shipping CapEx are not shown here. And that's why it's shown lower. But that's legitimate because somebody else who takes an offtake agreement for the liquefaction plant operator will have the shipping lined out and have the regas facilities. So that CapEx is not on the books of the liquefaction plant owner. Moving on quickly, this shows the stranded natural gas. Flared gas is a big issue, it's a big opportunity, it's a problem. And so therefore there's an opportunity for gas to liquids to help. And here is showing for Bakken, as they ramped up in oil production to 1 million barrels a day in 2014. You can see the amount of gas that was flared, peaked in 2014, and then it's diminished as they've, in spite of production keep going up, as they try to reduce the amount of flared gas. And this trend is going to spread throughout the United States too.
Right.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a cut on that as part of NGLs, as part of natural gas on that flare?
Oh, no. This flare, no, not NGLs have, and Brandon will talk about NGLs, but NGLs have a value They can be extracted out more easily, and so the NGLs are not part of this flared gas figure, as I understand. In fact, part of the problems with transporting Bakken crude on railroad cars was that too much of the NGLs was in there, and if they had an accident, the volatility of the crude oil was very high, and they caught fires, and there was some serious accidents. So flared gas, I mean, it probably has some, ethane and propane in it, but no, I don't think much. Propane, I don't think much. There's going to be a tail in there, of course, but. Okay, I'll go over this quickly. Another outlet, I'm sort of changing subjects here a little bit. Another outlet for natural gas is vehicles, compressed natural gas, or mostly here shown. And what we're showing here is that natural gas is for compressed natural gas for vehicles, is a very small portion of the amount of energy used for transportation. It has about, notice, 25 to 30,000 vehicles. And the point we want to make here is it's not an insignificant number, but it doesn't compare to the 13 million vehicles or the 200 million vehicles in the United States total. But you see buses on the road, you see waste management, garbage trucks, and it's out there. It's a clean fuel, and it is being promoted. The point we want to make here, and I'll make it quickly, is that it takes many years to build up a substantial market in this area, especially because you have to make new vehicles. You have to make them or convert them, you have to sell them, you have to operate them, and it takes many years to build up to have a significant penetration in the market. But it's coming along. Okay, now that brings me to the end. The major points I want to make is that natural gas, the many routes to monetize natural gas, both directly as a fuel and then to conversion products, methanol and ammonia. The power generation is the very big market, and here distributed generation is an emerging area. LNG is, I guess, the most prominent in terms of converting it other than direct use in electricity is the big player on the block as far as using the supply of shale, and smaller scale and mid-scale are adjusting, coming along to meet the new market for LNG. Natural gas conversion to methanol ammonias is come back in the United States with gas to liquids for fuels being worked on and developing. And again, the feasibility of all these alternatives depend on many different factors, company-specific, site-specific, and so you have to look at them, each individual case. And with that, I'll sort of end, going back to my beginning. The shale gave us this opportunity, shale gas, and there's a very good book on the frackers, and I hope one day there'll be a book, The Gas Monetizers, maybe. Thank you.